Good morning, everyone. This is the webinar to discuss the Office of Consumer Credit Commissioners motor vehicle rules to implement 2017 legislation. My name is Matt Nance. I'm the OCCC's Deputy General Counsel. I'm joined by several members of the OCCC staff, including our Director of Consumer Protection, Rudy Aguilar, Senior Review Examiner, William Purse, Financial Examiner, David Heineman, and Legal Assistant, Kimberly Bio. Before we start, I want to thank everyone for listening to our meeting and participating. Getting input from stakeholders is a really important part of our rulemaking process, and these meetings help us make sure we produce the best rules possible. We're holding this meeting on GoToWebinar. Some of you might be listening on your phone, some may be watching on your computer, some may be doing both. For those watching on your computer, there's a window where you can submit questions. So if you have technical questions about using the webinar, you can type them in there, and Kimberly will try to answer those. If you have any questions or comments on the rules themselves, go ahead and type those in at any time, and I'll be getting to those as well. We'll also have some time at the end when we'll unmute everyone. So if you're on your phone or on a computer with a mic, you'll be able to verbally tell us your questions or comments. So with that, let's get started. Again, we're here to talk about the OCCC's motor vehicle rules implementing legislation recently passed by the Texas legislature. The amendments relate to 4 bills that the legislature passed in the 2017 session: HB 2339 on trade and credit agreements, HB 2949 on documentary fees, SB 1052 on debt cancellation agreements and deferment charges, and SB 1199 on depreciation benefit service contracts. These rules are these 4 bills are scheduled to go into effect September 1st, 2017. HB 2339, HB 2949, and SB 1199 are still subject to the governor's review until June 18th. So he does have the opportunity to veto those bills. If he were to veto any of those bills, we would make sure to remove the rules implementing vetoed legislation from our proposal. The governor did sign SB 1052 over the weekend, the bill on debt cancellation agreements and deferment charges. As far as the timeline for the rules, we are accepting informal written pre-comments until 5 p.m. today. You can email those to Lori Hobbs. We plan to propose the rules at the Finance Commission's June 16th meeting. The Commission will vote on whether to publish them for comment. There will be time for official comments during July, and then if things go according to schedule, the rules will be up for adoption at the Finance Commission's August meeting and be effective in September. We have rule updates available on our website, and we'll also be posting the audio of this meeting on our rules webpage. So with that, I'll get started on the 4 different areas these rules cover. First is trade and credit agreements under HB 2339. So HB 2339 authorizes trade and credit agreements. A trade and credit agreement is an agreement that a buyer enters when they purchase a car. If the car is damaged in a collision but not totaled, the agreement provides a benefit when the buyer trades in that car to purchase another. HB 2339 has disclosure requirements, refunding requirements, a limitation on the amount charged, and a requirement that the seller have a contractual liability reimbursement policy approved by the Department of Insurance. The bill also explains that this is an agreement between the buyer and the seller and is separate from the retail installment contract. In our rule draft, our amendments specify where the benefit for a trade and credit agreement should be disclosed. So they amend 84.204 to specify the benefit should not be listed on the equity disclosure form, and 84.808 to specify that the benefit should be listed in the other line of the RIC's down payment section. We also have amendments to our record-keeping rules for sellers that require sellers to keep copies of the trade and credit agreement, any records used to process claims, and a register of agreements they've approved or denied. And we're also amending 84.804 just to add trade and credit agreements to a list of authorized charges. And with that, I'd like to pause for a bit to see if we have any questions in the chat about trading credit agreements. Looks like we don't have any questions yet. Again, there will be another chance for questions later on, including questions over the phone. So it looks like for now we don't yet have any questions over the chat. So with that, I'll go to the second area covered by these rules, doc fees. HB 2949 deals with documentary fees or doc fees. Currently, sellers are required to notify the OCCC if they charge a doc fee over $50 up to $150. HB 2949 states that a seller is not required to notify the OCCC before charging a doc fee amount presumed reasonable by rule. So regarding doc fees, our rule draft specifies that a doc fee of $150 or less is presumed reasonable under the new law, and a seller isn't required to provide a notification or cost analysis for a doc fee of $150 or less. For doc fees over $150, the current requirement to provide both a notification and cost analysis would remain in place. As a reminder, this bill is scheduled to go into effect September 1st. Until then, sellers still have to comply with the current requirement and notify the OCCC before they charge a doc fee over $50. And any questions related to doc fee? Looks like still no questions in the chat yet. Again, you can type those in at any time. Even if they relate to the previous topic, we will have another chance to address those at the end. Okay, so that's doc fee. The third bill that the rules implement is SB 1052. That bill deals with debt cancellation agreements and deferments. So for debt cancellation agreements, SB 1052 creates a new Chapter 354 of the Finance Code governing debt cancellation agreements that require insurance. The new chapter also allows debt cancellation agreements for covered vehicles like boats, motorcycles, ATVs, and so forth. SB 1052 also deals with deferments. It states that the current deferment charge provisions apply to contracts using the add-on method or scheduled installment earnings method. For true daily earnings contracts, the bill explains that finance charge can continue to accrue, and that accrual isn't considered a finance charge. For those true daily earnings deferments, the holder under the bill has to send a notice stating that finance charge continues to accrue. So in our rule draft, we are amending rules relating to debt cancellation agreements and deferment charges. In 84203, the deferment charge rule, we're removing the references to the maximum deferment charge for true daily earnings, since the maximum deferment charge provisions are just going to apply to add-on and scheduled installment earnings contracts. In 84302, 84308, 84309, we're updating references to the new Finance Code Chapter 354 created by SB 1052. In 84708, 84709, those are our record-keeping rules for holders. We're specifying that holders must keep written deferment agreements and notices, as well as the refunding records for debt cancellation agreements. And we're adding a new section 86202, specifying that the debt cancellation agreements for these Chapter 345 covered vehicles like motorcycles, boats, and ATVs are subject to our current submission requirements in 84309. And do we have any questions related to debt cancellation agreements? Okay. Once again, there will be another opportunity for questions at the end. So with that, I'll move on to the last bill that the rules implement. That's SB 1199, related to depreciation benefit service contracts. So SB 1199 authorizes depreciation benefit optional member programs. This is a type of service contract that provides a benefit when a buyer's car is stolen or totaled, and the buyer comes to a participating dealer to buy a new vehicle. The depreciation benefit program would be subject to the same requirements that apply to service contracts under Chapter 1304 of the Occupations Code, including the requirement that the provider register with the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation, as well as refunding and disclosure requirements. In our rule draft, our rule amendments specify where on the retail installment contract the benefit should be disclosed. We're also amending our record-keeping rules at 84707 and 708 to specify that sellers must maintain records, including evidence of the amount of the credit and documentation obtained by the seller to process a claim. We're amending 84804 to add depreciation benefit programs to a list of authorized charges. And similar to the trade and credit agreements, we're amending 84808 to specify that the benefit should be listed on the other line of the RIC's down payment section. Okay, so that completes my remarks on the 4 main areas of these rules. Do we have any questions from the chat related to any of these issues before we start unmuting folks?
Yes.
Okay, well, let's try to address those first, and then I'll unmute everyone, and you'll have a chance to verbally say your questions after that.
Okay, so the first one is regarding House Bill 2399, the trading credit agreement. It says, to be clear, the initial charge for the contract would be appropriately disclosed as an other charge on the initial contract. The regulations only prescribe the manner in which the trade-in credit agreement's benefit is disclosed on the second contract, correct?
Okay, so the question was trying to confirm the rules, our amendment to the plain language rules in 84808, that applies to the kind of second transaction where the benefit is provided. And I think that's correct. Yeah. Okay, so I think the commenter was, substantially correct that you've got kind of 2 transactions here. You've got the transaction where the consumer buys the trade and credit agreement. You've got a second transaction where they receive a benefit under that. For the first transaction, yes, you're disclosing a charge under the trade and credit agreement. There is an other line under kind of other charges in the retail installment contract itemization of amount finance to disclose the charge. In the second transaction, where the consumer is getting a benefit, you're disclosing it as a benefit, and that's going to be part of the down payment in the other section of the down payment. So I think the commenter was substantially correct that, yeah, in the first transaction, you're disclosing the charge for the agreement as in the charges section. In the second transaction, you're disclosing the benefit in the down payment section. Okay. Do we have
Yes.
other
Okay, so we
questions
have
from
another
chat?
one on for true daily earnings contracts. Assuming adoption of the rule as drafted, what is required for a deferment other than the notice stated in SB 1052? Is an email or similar signature by the customer acceptable?
That's a good question about the formal requirements of complying with the statute. The statute doesn't specify requirements other than that written notification, so I don't have a direct answer to that question right now. We will take a look at that issue. I'll note that as an issue for us to look into as we try to draft amended guidance for deferment charges over the summer. It is somewhat outside the scope of our rule because our rule deals with, again, the deferment charges, and we're going to be specifying that the deferment charge rule doesn't apply to those true daily earnings contracts. So that's a good question. I think it's outside the scope of these particular rule amendments, but that's certainly something we will try to take a look at as we draft amended guidance for deferment charges over the summer.
Okay, regarding SB 1052 debt cancellation agreements, is the OCCC of the view that DCAs are only permitted effective September 1?
Okay, the question was about when sellers may start offering the DCAs for new transactions. And yes, current law continues to be in effect until September 1st. And that's really true for all these bills. All these bills go into effect September 1st. Until September 1st, creditors need to continue to comply with current law. We anticipate that we're going to start accepting submissions of DCAs for these new covered vehicles starting July 1st of 2017. And then starting September 1st, sellers would be able to start using approved DCAs for these vehicles that our office has approved. But before September 1st, sellers should continue to comply with current requirements and limit their DCAs to Chapter 348 motor vehicles like automobiles, trucks, and so forth. So yeah, don't start offering these DCAs on covered vehicles until number one, it's September 1st, and number two, you have a DCA that has been approved by our office.
Okay, for the depreciation benefit member program, any limits on what a replacement vehicle is, for example, may not be identical model and equipment?
Okay, the question is about whether there's a limit on the replacement vehicle. I'm not sure that that's addressed in the legislation, so I'm not sure that I have an answer for that right now. We'll try to take a look at that. Again, that issue is not really part of our rules. That would kind of depend on an interpretation of the text of the bill itself. So I'll also try to note that as an issue for us to take a look at.
There's a follow-up question on that that says, also it appears the statute and rule do not require a filing of the amount of the fee. Any thoughts at this point as to what may be needed to show reasonableness of the fee?
Did that specify they're referring to the depreciation benefit?
Yes, it's a follow-up question by the same person that asked the depreciation.
Okay, so again, I don't have an answer on that today. We'll try to take a look at that. It may be that because the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation has kind of primary enforcement authority over the occupations code provisions that authorize this, and our rule amendments are really focused more on the record keeping, making sure that the sellers have adequate records of these depreciation benefit claims. So we'll try to keep a lookout for whether TDLR provides some sort of guidance on that issue of whether there's some limit on the replacement vehicle. But yeah, as of right now, I did not see any answer to that in the bill that was passed by the legislature.
Also, we received several questions related to SB 1199 about how long records must be maintained and whether they must be maintained in paper or electronically.
Right. The amendments go into our current rules, which generally require records to be maintained for 4 years, for the later of 4 years from the date of the transaction, or 2 years from the date of or 2 years from the date of final entry. Yeah, the date of the final entry. So they are subject to that current requirement. Our rules also, I believe, allow either paper or electronic record keeping. So again, these kind of new amendments are going to the existing rule that has that period for keeping records and allows either paper or electronic record keeping.
For SB 1099, for OCCC purposes, who is the seller, the vendor that sells the contract to automobile dealers, or the automobile dealer with respect to the record keeping?
Okay, the question asked about SB 1099. I'm not sure whether that was about, I'm guessing that was about SB 1199. SB 1199. The seller under our rule is the seller of the motor vehicle. The Occupations Code uses the term provider to refer to the provider of the service contract itself. But yeah, when our rules talk about the seller, they are talking about our licensee that is selling the motor vehicle.
It looks like we've answered all the questions that have come in.
Okay. Well, thank you for those questions. Those are really good questions. That gives us a lot to think about as we move forward. We're going to unmute all of you to give everyone who's on the phone or a mic'd computer a chance to say your questions or comments. If you don't want us to hear the audio from your end, please remember to mute your phone and your computer's mic. Again, we're about to unmute everyone on our end, so if you want to stay muted, please make sure your phone and computer mic are on mute. And if you'd like to type in any questions through chat, please feel free to do that as well. Okay, we're kind of going manually unmuting folks. Don't have a question. Okay, we're still in the process of unmuting people. Again, we've been getting some feedback, so if you don't have a question, please make sure your end is muted.
And you've got 4 nuclear power plants in your district alone, windmills, hydropower plants. Shouldn't you ask who I would deal with which caveat?
It's talking, so I don't know if she's trying to ask a question.
Okay, it sounds like
I think we're good. It looks everybody that wants to be unmuted is unmuted.
Okay,
A lot of people are self-muted.
It looks like everyone's been unmuted who would like to talk. We got a little bit of audio coming in. I'm sorry I couldn't make out the question we got. Again, if you have a question you want to verbally say over the phone, please say that now if you would. Okay.
Okay, I do have another question that came in.
We have another question over the chat.
Yeah, with regard to SB 1199, will auto dealers be able to begin offering the depreciation benefit program effective September 1, or might that happen earlier?
Again, that is effective September 1st. Until September 1st, that, this legislation authorized that product. So you should not be selling that product in transactions before September 1st. Yeah, and it'll still, again, the provider has to be authorized through the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation.
That authorization date can't be until
that
date or later.
Right. Okay. Okay, so that's all our questions on chat. I'll wait about another minute to see if we get any other questions over the phone.
Okay, I was asked to repeat that question, so I don't know if it wasn't heard, but the question was whether auto dealers will be able to begin offering the depreciation benefit program effective September 1st, or might it happen earlier?
And again, the answer was that is effective September 1st. Dealers should not be offering it before then, and it is subject to all the requirements for service contracts, including registration and approval through the Department of Licensing and Regulation.
Before it's offered.
Yeah, right. Okay, it sounds like we've addressed the questions that have come in through chat. I haven't heard any questions over the phone. If you have other questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Again, we are accepting informal pre-comments until 5 p.m. today. We expect that we will be presenting these rule amendments at the Finance Commission's June 16th meeting. I want to thank everyone for listening in. Audio of this meeting will be available on our website, and again, please feel free to submit your informal written pre-comments by 5 p.m. today. Thank you all for participating, and that's it for our webinar.